than I had hoped getting to the House. But after 14 years in the House, I learned what Ronald Reagan told us is that government's not the solution, it's the problem. And we certainly see it today. The bright hope that I found serving in the Senate was that if I left Washington and went out across the country, worked directly with people at the grassroots level and with good candidates who had the right ideas, that we could do things that they said were impossible. That we could elect folks that supposedly couldn't get elected because they were conservatives. We saw that with a group of people in 2010 who were not elected by the Republican Party, they were elected by the American people. Folks like Marco Rubio and Rand Paul, Pat Toomey, Mike Lee, Ron Johnson, and others who came in running on a set of principles who the first day they arrived in the Senate changed something they told me that we had no chance of changing, that it was part of the system forever. And that was the favor factory we call earmarks, where we had up to 10,000 of them a year that pretty much meant we spent the whole year working on parochial issues and rather than what we needed to focus on for our country. But Americans changed that. And so I realized that working with people directly, that if we were really going to change the course of America, that I had to get outside of the political framework, outside of Washington, and work with the laboratories of democracy, the laboratories of freedom, to demonstrate how our ideas work. That's the frustrating thing. You can look around the country, and actually 2012 was a great election for conservatives. We elected more conservative governors and legislators than we ever had before. And bold governors and legislatures are doing bold things to move their states in the right direction. And so instead of arguing theory in Washington, what I've been doing the last couple of months, I've been in about 20 cities, talking about the success stories, talking about the states that have done the right things and moved their states forward. I've used Texas as an example a lot, whether it's on their tax system or developing their own energy or their tort reform. And we can look at other states that have developed energy, North Dakota and Pennsylvania. Every state that advances a conservative principle is seeing the benefits, while states like Illinois and California continue to move in the direction of Europe and Greece. And you look at cities like Detroit that have been under liberal progressive control for decades, the outcome of Barack Obama's policies are pretty clear. But it's become more and more apparent that the key to turning our country around is at the state level. Because the more states succeed with the right ideas, the harder it is for us to resist those ideas in Washington. So that's why the work you do here is so important. And as I told Governor Perry this morning, this is not just about Texas. I'm here because this is about my country. And the people in Washington are not going to see the light until they feel the heat from states like Texas that are doing the right thing. And in a few years, few months, I don't know when it's going to happen, they're going to spin us up against some kind of wall in Washington, and everyone's going to look around to try to decide what we do next. And either we continue to go in the same wrong direction, or we look around and say, look at Texas. Look what works there. And instead of forming a national education policy, what I hope we'll do is look at states like Texas and Florida and other states and say, hey, look what works. It's not about theoretical debates, it's about what works. That's why you're so important. Because if this president gets control of the Congress in the next election, he's going to try to pass an education policy. And I hope Texas is first in line saying, no way, we're setting our own course here. And we need to be able to show success. It takes a while. It's the most politically difficult reform to make because the teachers' unions and the left are so animated when you try to change anything. But what changes people, we've seen it in Washington in the DC Scholarship. And you can tell it in a story of Rashawn Kelly, who in the 5th grade, his dad found he was 3 grades behind and had no education plan for him at all. He had to go to court to get a tutor, and even then could not get his son in the right direction. But he got a DC scholarship and got in another school. 2 years he caught up. He eventually graduated high school. He's now in college. And when you hear his story and his mom talk about getting out of a school that had 8 police officers and they were still afraid for their life, that's why Juan Williams did a documentary for Heritage on education, freedom, and choice. That's why the Washington Post believes in education choice now, is because it's real, it's personal, it changes lives. And it's for the people who need it the most who don't vote for it. It's for the disadvantaged, the at-risk kids. It's for Hispanics and African Americans. This is what changes their life and the opportunity for states. So we're here just to offer our support, because I can tell you any candidate or any elected official who takes on this issue is going to be maligned. And the information out there is so wrong about what these reforms actually do. We've got the evidence, and along with your partners here, the State Public Policy Foundation, we want to make sure people know the truth. But any of you who can be champions and help to buck up the legislators, the governor is all in on this, and he knows that if Texas moves ahead with this, it'll change the course of our country. And this one issue does more to refute the lies of the left than any other issue. Because the people who they say their policies help are being hurt by their policies. Education, opportunity, freedom, and choice helps everyone grab that ladder of opportunity. So we're excited to be here with you. All eyes are on Texas, so God bless Texas and what you're doing here. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DeMint. We really appreciate your time and effort in Texas and look forward to a long relationship together on this issue. Continuing. Now it's a real pleasure to introduce our keynoter for today, the Honorable Archer Davis. Of course, he is a former United States Congressman serving the 7th District of Alabama as a Democrat from 2003 to 2010. He was viewed, I'm sure many of you remember, as a rising star in the House, assuming positions of influence, including a seat on the Ways and Means Committee, recruitment chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in the 2008 cycle, and co-chair of the New Democrat Coalition. In 2008, Esquire magazine named him one of the 10 best congressmen in America. We all expected to see him become governor of Alabama, and I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that, but unfortunately that didn't happen, but sometimes God has other plans for us, doesn't he? And so today, Davis lives in Washington, D.C., is an attorney. Oh, you're in Virginia? No, of course not. Don't live in Washington. Lives in Virginia. He's a columnist and a commentator, contributor to Politico, National Review, The Recovering Politician, Ricochet, and has appeared as a guest analyst on MSNBC, CNBC, and of course the Fox Business Network. He is a magna cum laude graduate with several degrees from Harvard University, only because he couldn't get into Texas A&M. And other than that, please help me welcome Congressman Archer Davis. Thank you so much.
Brooke, thank you very much. You know, whenever I'm introduced, I'm always a little bit anxious because, you know, sometimes you're not sure what's going to come out of the person's mouth. And frankly, a lot of the introductions that are online about me are written by Democrats. I'm a Democrat anymore. So, and I'm always exactly curious what the introducer is going to say. Now, I always worry when I get in front of a conservative audience and someone mentions the Harvard stuff. So I've already gotten in trouble, but I'm used to having to edit my introductions for you guys. I like to leave out the Harvard part sometimes. When I was a Democrat, the Alabama Democratic Party was so corrupt I had to leave out the prosecutor part. So, thank you very much. You know, Brooke got one thing wrong at the beginning that still has me a little bit confused. She said that there were going to be 2 illustrious speakers, and we've heard from Jim DeMint, so I'm looking around the program trying to find who the mystery person is, because it's not me. But I am very honored to be here today to talk to all of you who are so involved in this cause and this movement, and who understand that, yeah, there are interesting conversations going on in Washington, D.C. Most of the work is going on in state capitals. And thankfully, from the perspective perspective of most of the folks in this room, most of the work that's going to change this country and put her back on a path to prosperity and security, other work is going to happen in the Austins of the world and not the Washingtons of the world. I am thankful to follow Jim DeMint to this podium. All of you know there were people all around the country who were telling Jim DeMint, Senator, you're doing wonderful things in the Senate, but we'd really like to see you become president. So he obviously thought about that advice and took it to heart and decided, I will become president, but I will take a presidency where I can get something done. So he goes to Heritage, and they are lucky to have him. And Senator Jim, thank you so much. He and I overlapped for 2 years in the House of Representatives. You probably doesn't remember. I had no gray hair at the time. I was 25 pounds lighter, so you probably didn't recognize me. But I was in the U.S. House when he was gearing up to run for the Senate, and people have always expected wonderful things from him. So thank you for your leadership. Let me say one other thing at the outset before I kind of get to the heart of my comments about school choice. I'm glad Gloria Romero is here. And some of you had the opportunity to hear her presentation. I foolishly scheduled a radio interview literally during the middle part of her presentation, so I had to miss it. But I'm glad she's here because, number one is the selfish reason that I want at least someone else in the room besides me to have the experience of having gone to Democratic Party committee meetings and Gloria. But more fundamentally, she said something last night that stuck with me as I thought about my remarks overnight. Even if school choice happens in a state like Texas, even if school choice and the other pillars of education reform happen in various states around this country, the winning won't be the end of the battle. The winning can happen, frankly, just with enough reform-minded Republicans and with enough market-oriented conservatives. Reform-oriented conservatives and Republicans are enough to produce victories in many of these states, but the winning isn't the end of the game. You know why? Because even after you win the political fight and institute choice and put it on the books in the state of Texas, you got to sell it to families. Unless this is all just about scoring political points and putting political victories up on the scoreboard, and I know it's about much more than that to people in this room, but unless all it's about is scoring points, none of this does any good unless families are taking advantage of the options you're fighting hard to provide them. And the parents who are making those choices, as Gloria pointed out at our dinner last night, are invariably going to be families who aren't terribly conservative in a lot of their politics, who aren't necessarily voting even for some of the people who are helping them make this happen, and who don't share the worldview of a lot of folks in this room. And as they make a determination whether or not they're going to take advantage of the power you're trying to give them, many of the leaders in their communities are going to be telling them that you do not have their best interests at heart. So winning in the game, winning is just the beginning of the game. The game is going to depend on convincing families all around the state of Texas and around states like this that this new power they're being given is a power they ought to exercise. So the long-range winning require not just Republicans, not just conservatives, but Democrats who want to also do the right thing. And I'm thankful that she's become part of this movement. So Gloria, thank you again for the work you do. The other big point I want to make to you at the outset, at all times, this is a fight about children and their parents. We lose sight of that sometimes, and we think it's a fight about policies. We think it's a fight about numbers, statistics. This is a fight about specific children and their lives. And the best way I can make that point to you is to tell you about one particular child. He lives in Highland Park, Michigan. For those of you who don't know your Michigan geography, Highland Park is a suburb of Detroit. It is a community occupied by a lot of working class people. It's not a poor community. It's a solidly middle class environment. It consists of all manner of hard-working families, but it's not the poor, strapped, desperate community that you sometimes hear about by stretch of the imagination. Highland Park has a junior high school. And this particular child, whose name is Quentin, was a 7th grader at the end of the 2011 school year. At the end of the 2011 school year, all the 7th graders in Quentin's class were asked to produce an essay answering the following question. The question, how can we make your school better? I want to show you the essay that Quentin wrote, or at least an excerpt from it that's telling. And keep in mind these things about this child. He's 13 years of age. He was promoted from the 7th grade to the 8th grade. He's never failed a grade in his life. Successfully passed from one grade to another. I want you to read and see part of his answer to the question, how can we make your school better? All of you can read, but for some who can't see it, I'll read it out loud. Starts by saying, my name is Quentin. And you'll notice he misspells his name. And you can make the school gooder by getting people that will do what appears to be the job, that is paid for, get a football team, apparently he means team, for the, he says, kind, presumably he means kids. Maybe you see what's there, apparently he means basketball team. Get another, probably gym teacher, but he has there as gym teacher misspelled, for the school. Get a lot of teacher. It takes only a cursory glance for you to see that this child, who was promoted from the 7th grade to the 8th grade, every single section of that sentence contains either a spelling error, a basic construction error, a syntactical error, and you can certainly argue that the whole thing is riddled with what amounts to logical errors as well. Some of you in this room have 13-year-old children. Some of your 13-year-old kids, Quinn's age, will be reading Great Expectations and Romeo and Juliet this semester. Quinn is struggling to spell. Some of you have 13-year-old kids who will be taking debate. Remember, I took debate for the first time when I was 13. A lot of your kids will too, and they'll shock you. One day they'll come home and they will start winning political arguments against you at the dinner table. Quentin is struggling with organizing a basic line of thought around a pretty simple notion: how do we make the school better? Some of you have 13-year-old kids who are going to give you bragging rights at the office cocktail party. They're going to take some test in the next few years, and you're going to see they're already reading at college level, and you'll get to brag about that and tell all your friends about it and make you very proud. Quentin, according to a behavioral expert who's examined him, to a reading specialist who's examined him in his work, Quentin is 13, but he reads at the level of a 6-year-old child. tell you all of this, obviously not to ridicule this child, obviously not to make mirth about what's on the board, to make a very basic point. This is a child who is in an American public school that has failed him to the point that it has sent him 7 times from one grade to another without lifting his reading skills above the level that he started with when he was 6 and entered the system. We know about this child, in case you wonder. He's a plaintiff in a lawsuit. His family, and he's filed a lawsuit, as those who are lawyers in the room know, children have to file under a pseudonym. Quentin happens to be his real name. We don't know his last name, but it's actually a case. Quentin et al. Versus ACLU, rather versus Michigan. ACLU is the one bringing the case. Quentin versus State of Michigan, Department of Education. It's an equity funding lawsuit. Some of you in this room, if you know anything about equity funding lawsuits, you know this much. The average equity funding lawsuit takes 8 years to run from the filing to some kind of resolution. I'm from the great state of Alabama originally. We had an equity funding lawsuit filed in September 1989. The Alabama Supreme Court got around to resolving it in 2004 by saying they needed additional facts 15 years later. The average equity funding case is 8 years. Let's say Quinn wins this suit. Let's say some judge somewhere in Michigan or some combination of the Michigan Supreme Court one day say, you know what, that Quentin versus Michigan case the ACLU brought, there's merit to that case, and we're going to require additional funding, whatever they choose to require. The only problem with that, that child will never see a second's worth of benefit from that ruling when it comes. 8 years from now, that 13-year-old child will be 21 years of age. Is there any reason to think, based on his current course, that at the age of 21, he's going to be ready to go to work for some of the businesses that some of you represent in this room? Is there any reason to think that Quinn, at the age of 21, will be a senior in college, as a few people in this room are? Equity funding lawsuits, perfectly fine for the next generation. Does nothing for the kids whose names are on the suit. Something else you ought to know about Quinn. He has 2 parents, both of whom are employed and working. We don't know much about them, but I would venture that they care as much about their child as any of you do about yours. Well, what can they do for him? Yes, they can file a lawsuit that will take years to resolve itself. Because they live in Michigan, they can't transfer him to another school. So happens in 2010, Michigan had a choice initiative on the ballot in the form of a referendum, and it was voted down. And why is it interesting and important? That same day on the ballot, Michigan elected a Republican conservative governor and elected Republicans up and down the ballot in a very good Republican year of 2010. The same voters who cast that ballot for conservative, market-oriented reforms in most aspects of state government comfortably by a 10-point margin voted down a school choice bill in Michigan. So by definition, you know, I went to Harvard, so I don't do math very well. But by definition, you can compute that a chunk of people voted for a Republican governor, for Republican politicians, and then turn around and voted against a school choice initiative. And yet the teachers union pumped a bunch of money into beating it. Suffice it to say, the math of that result suggests that it wasn't just Democrats who worked best. Quinn's parents don't have enough money to put him in a private school. They've said that much in interviews. They've been asked in interviews, why just put him in a private school? They've given the candid answer, we can't afford a good one. Michigan's legislature has rejected vouchers every time they've had a chance to look at the question. So, fight this battle, please understand that you've got your Quins here in Texas. You've got your Quins in Houston, you've got them in Dallas, you've got them in San Antonio, you've got them in all the other cities that ring across this state. You've got your Quins, and you can't spot them on first sight, because if you saw this kid walking down the street, you'd see a kid who doesn't live in a broken home, a kid who's got 2 parents who are employed, but is 13 and reading at the proficiency of a 6-year-old. So, I want to underscore this point. This has to be an argument about freeing and liberating children who, through no fault of their own, have not made it through a school system that is failing them with the skills that they need. Second of all, it's about parents who, through no fault of their own, lack the financial capacity and the power to free those kids themselves. And by the way, as in every other state, Michigan does have choice. It's choice of people who've got the money to afford it and the money to move into a better school district. The fight in Michigan was about extending choice, not just to folks and parents who've got money, but to folks like Quinn's parents. Now here's the second to last point that I want to make to you today. Doesn't it kind of bother you, as well-informed people who follow the news, that the only time you hear about this kind of thing is when you come to conferences like this? After we had our dinner last night, I turned on my cable news. You know, once I found out that my favorite team, the Thunder, weren't playing, so I didn't have to worry about them. I didn't have to root against San Antonio, get home field and all that. But once I established that important stuff, turn on the news and I scan the cable channels, Fox, MSNBC, and CNN like I do most nights. I don't ever turn on and hear them talking about this kind of stuff. I don't hear our channel talking about it. I don't hear their channel talking about it. We just had a presidential campaign where literally each side, ours and theirs, spent $1 billion each, and another $1 billion was spent in independent expenditures. $3 billion, the size of a small company, was spent on getting 5% of the people to make up their minds for president. Not one single advertisement talked about 13-year-old children who read at the level of a 6-year-old. We have 3 presidential debates that 60 million Americans on average watched, more than watched any other thing on TV that wasn't a football game last year. There was not one single question, much less one single answer, about 13-year-old children who can't read, whose parents don't have the resources to move them to a place that can teach them how to read and do right by them. So I want to make this bipartisan comment. Both of our big political causes, left and right, both of our parties, Democrat, Republican, have been asleep at the switch on this issue. Now, you haven't been asleep at the switch here in the state of Texas, but around this country, it's a fair statement to make that parties have been asleep at the switch. I want you to think about this. Put party aside, conservative and liberal, the 2 ways the parties are organized these days. It bothers me, and it ought to bother you, that too many of us who call ourselves conservatives are interested in every kind of market choice but one's exercised by parents who need to put their kids in better schools, and they're animated by every other kind of market choice, but don't get too fired up about this stuff. And our liberal friends, it ought to bother them that the one civil right they don't believe in is the right of a kid to get out of a school that's failed him. That's the one set of marginalized people that don't seem to be near the core of their hearts. So, we conservatives, our sometimes adversaries who are liberals, we ought to both be challenged to live up to the things that we think that we say. Something else we ought to both be challenged to Every child is potentially powerful. That 13-year-old child who reads at the level of a 6-year-old is one good reading teacher away from experiencing Dickens. Some of you may admire, as I do, a guy who's getting a lot of attention these days, a guy named Ben Carson. If you really know the Ben Carson story, don't you think it's just about health savings accounts and about, talking bad about Obamacare while Obama was sitting there? That's only part of the story. Here's part of the story that you may not know. Ben Carson could barely read when he was in junior high school, and Ben Carson was a failing student up until the time he was 16. He struggled to read, and we don't know what his writing sample would have looked like when he was 13. Some combination of teachers and some combination of learning got him off of that path and turned him to a man who could separate conjoined twins as an adult. Children are all potentially powerful. And if someone asks you what this fight is really about, you tell them it's about freeing up children to be as powerful as they can be. Here's the last thing I want to say. Part of why this isn't a bigger issue is just neither the left or right live up to the meaning of their true creed by talking about it. It's kind of a simple reason. Some of the politicians in the room, former politicians, can understand. Parents of 13-year-old kids who can't read are wonderful people, but they're not very good about organizing political fundraisers. They don't form a lot of super PACs. So it's caused to get on the radar screen a whole lot. I'll make one crassly political point to everybody in this room who's interested in politics. If you're trying to find something we ought to be spending our dollars on in terms of causes and ideas in this country, we need to start finding some billionaires who are willing to put their dollars around the cause of education reform and around the cause of 13-year-old children who are reading like 6-year-olds. That's worth $1 billion too, don't you think? Yeah. Here's the other reason, and this was about my point about Michigan. You know why that thing failed in Michigan when they were electing a conservative governor and Rick Snyder and voting for Republicans are their best year in Michigan? You might wonder, how in the world, at the end of the day, do Republicans have a great year in Michigan and fail on school choice, which we think of as kind of a Republican conservative initiative? Here's why. If you go precinct by precinct in Michigan, you see that it failed in the African-American precincts as the teachers' unions beat it up to the point where nobody could recognize it, but it underperformed in the white suburban conservative precincts to the point where it only narrowly passed, meaning in the low 50s when it needed to hit the mid-60s to outvote Detroit. Here's why. Enough of the people living in those suburbs, my friends, convinced themselves, oh yeah, that school choice stuff, that's for those really bad schools in Detroit. Our school's pretty good. And our schools are fine, so will this be yet more taxpayer dollars that are going to some community that's not mine, and aren't we conservatives against that kind of thing? I want to end with this point, but I want to ask you to drive home, and when somebody confronts you with that argument, what's this got to do with me? Years ago when I was in politics, I was in the U.S. Congress, and I was a Democrat, but I was the only Democrat who ever got invited to speak to conservative Republican groups. I should have seen the future in that. So one day, the realtors in Mountain Brook, Alabama, invited me to come and speak to them at a breakfast one morning. So I get up there, I'm the one Democrat they had seen who wasn't on a TV screen, and I decided to talk about education reform in the state of Alabama. Gave a talk that I thought was an okay talk. People listened, pretended to listen, whatever they had to do. At the end of it, a young lady stood up, who was a realtor. She said to me, Mr. Davis, I thought you gave a very impressive talk, but you talked about failing schools in Jefferson County and Birmingham. We happen to have the best school district in the state in Mountain Brook. And I just wish you had talked a little bit more about something that actually affects the lives of the people in this room. You know, she said it with a smile. It was a bar point of question. I will tell you, what I said to her. I said, here's what I want you to think about. The next time you think that this problem is somebody else's, the next time your grandparents are in the hospital and you go visit them, don't just talk to the doctors. Talk to the orderlies who change the sheets. Talk to the techs who come in and draw blood every so many hours. Stroll down to the kitchen and talk to the dietitians who prepare the special meals. Talk to the people who take the x-rays and actually read them and see them before the docs do. Ask them where they went to high school. You won't hear Mountain Brook High a whole lot. You'll hear Jess Lanier and McAdory. Those are inner city schools. They're predominantly African American or white working class in Birmingham, Alabama. I could fill in the names of schools here in Austin and all around the state of Texas. Same story. People who care for our own, their time of need. Chances are they went to the very schools sometimes our kids will never see. Remember saying that morning to those realtors, your kids may never darken the door of some of these schools, but the people who sustain us and lift us up do. And if you want those people to be competent, if you want them to be good at what they do, you have just discovered your link to the places outside your gated walls. That's how we have to talk about this. At the end of the day, all we are is human beings, and we human beings can be narrow, selfish people. We want to primarily be for stuff that helps us. So instead of trying to fight that, let's try to take advantage of it. We need to point out this choice stuff, this reform stuff. Yeah, this is stuff that helps us too. If you run a business, this is stuff that helps you because you'll run your business better if you've got children who can read instead of children who can't. The reality is no matter what you do, your enterprise is stronger financially. Your enterprise is better because of the quality of people who work for you. That is the link you have to school districts that your children do not attend, and that is a point that you have to make all throughout the state of Texas. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to get it done now. The day is going to come when there is a vote scheduled at 2 o'clock in the afternoon that will decide whether or not Texas is a reform state or a state that just talks reform. That day will come and that hour will come, and when you're trying to round those votes up, yeah, part of your impediment will be the teachers' unions. Part of the impediment will be people on our side who are saying, I'm not convinced that this helps me and my kind. What you say to them is when you lift them up, you lift you up too. Don't try to fight human self-interest. Take advantage of human self-interest and say, we need this too to be stronger and richer and better and more prosperous. So, last 30 seconds out of my mouth, thank you for what you're doing. I hesitate to make a political point, but I'll do it just one more time. We conservatives, you know what they beat us up over? Yeah, they beat us up over being every kind of ist and ick you can be, not liking this group or that group. But you know what they really beat us up over? They beat us up over the idea that we are not terribly concerned about actually helping anybody. People ask me, and my new friend Virginia here, people often ask us, why is it we can't get more of these very conservative minorities who share our views on all these social issues? Here's the answer: because those very conservative minorities who share your views on social issues aren't confident that you want to lift people like them up, and they need to know that before they give you a vote and put you in power. Way to convince them. Way to convince some of these Austin liberals who are walking around thinking they're so cosmopolitan and who think you're so benighted.
if you want to convince some of them, the day will come you need some of their votes to come to our side too. You tell them, no, we actually have a conservatism that works for everybody. It's a myth that our conservatism only works for certain kind of people in certain parts of Texas. Our conservatism works for everybody. So, keep on pressing that fight. Keep on believing in a conservatism that works for everybody. And if you do that, not only will you keep Texas red, we'll keep Texas strong. Thank you all.
Thank you, Congressman Davis. I think the idea that every child is powerful and that every child can change the world should drive us. And I know we will be relentless and tireless in this fight in Texas. And I hope soon you can come back and congratulate what will be the largest educational opportunity program in the country and will literally change the world. So thank you for being here so much. Please help me thank Congressman Davis. Many of you heard and were part of the panels, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't introduce Virginia Walden Ford, who is sitting here at the front table. Ms. Walden Ford was the parent organizer in 2003 that ultimately resulted in the DC Opportunity Scholarships. And what an extraordinary fire and inspiration you are to our work here, and we are so honored to have you in Texas with us today. Thank you. And one more quick introduction. Is Senator Romero still here, or did she leave?
She's being introduced to members of the legislature.
Okay, we mentioned her in our comments. She is, of course, a Democrat from the California State Senate, but one thing that she was able to do there was come up with the idea and then implement the parent trigger law. And that is a law where if you have, depending on how you write it, but if you have 51% of parents sign a petition, that school immediately turns over to a charter school. And talk about being able to save children today versus in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years when it's too late. It is an idea that is working in California and that we're currently moving through the legislature. So we're very grateful. Chuck, if you'll let her know too. So happy to have her. And I finally would be remiss if I didn't thank the wonderful, amazing, fantastic TPPF staff that put on these great events time after time after time. Mike, Joyce, you, and Sherry, and the rest of the team. Thank you so much. Today with a heart that is more convicted than ever to really go out and to change the world for these generations of children that we're losing. Thank you all so much for being here.